All right. I'm happy to introduce Heather McCain, the Executive Director from Citizens for Accessible Neighborhoods. And I'm going to let her sort of touch base with you guys and do a full introduction of herself. And she's going to go through what her new plan called the Board Diversity Project. So take it away, Heather.
Hi. So yeah, I'm the founder and executive director of Citizens for Accessible Neighborhoods. I founded it because of inaccessible issues in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, where I lived at the time. I'm now in Vancouver, and we worked on a wide array of projects, but in February of this year, we launched our most ambitious initiative, which is why I'm here to talk to you all today. And so I'm going to attempt to show you my screen. And Terry, just remind me, where am I supposed to go for this?
There should be a share button.
Yeah,
okay.
At
the bottom. So if you click on that, and then you'll have the option to be able to share. There you
go. Okay, so. All right, can everyone see that?
Yep, they can't answer you because they're on mute, but.
Okay. Right. So it's called the Board Diversity Project. It's a multi-year strategy to assist boards in finding, retaining, and utilizing board members that truly represent our province's diverse population, as well as to supply those interested in joining boards or new to boards with reliable and accessible information and resources. The reason we started it was we heard from members who were tired of organizations that say they represent a certain population not having anybody from that population within positions of power, so management or on their board. And we tried to think of how we could help with the problem. And a lot of our work is very intersectional, and we work with a lot of different groups, different populations. And boards is something that we have a lot of contacts in, and so we thought, well, let's start with boards. Hopefully whatever we do with this project can then be duplicated in other areas, but we will start with the boards first. The long-term goal of the Board Diversity Project is to have a website that acts as a hub. When I started Citizens for Accessible Neighborhoods, one of the things I really wanted to focus on was access to information, and we started a website that acts as a hub of information for those who need support with their disability or with those in their support system. And we very much want to duplicate that with this project as well, and have a one-stop shop place for people to go to find information about board participation. And we're going at this from two different angles. We want to help people who want to go onto boards and are from the underrepresented populations, but we also recognize that there are boards who are not currently, that don't have an environment that is conducive to meaningful participation, that they would not know how to interact with people from diverse populations. And so we want to talk to the boards and think about training and how can we contribute or get involved to encourage them to do some hard work themselves to ensure that when they welcome on people from underrepresented populations, they're doing so in an inclusive and welcoming manner. As I mentioned, access to information is huge to our organization, and we really see this project as a continuation of that founding objective. So there's a couple of ways that we're asking for people to help. This is all available on our website. There's a 2-page sheet about the project, so everything in this slideshow you can get there as well. But the first thing we're asking is for people to participate in conversations. We want to hear from everybody. We want to hear from people who haven't had board experience, who have had board experience, who've had good, who's had bad. I'm someone who's been on several boards, and some have been good and some have been bad, and we really want a broad range of voices, and we want to hear from people from underrepresented populations. So that's people with disabilities, racialized, Indigenous, queer, trans, people who live in poverty, as well as geographical location, because often there's organizations that say they are a BC organization, but are only ever in Vancouver and only do Vancouver projects. So geographical representation is another type of diversity that we are trying to address. We want to know what precludes participation. Why aren't people joining boards? One of the things that we've heard is people just don't even know what boards are or what their role would be. And so we're looking to find the gaps in knowledge so that we can fill it within our website. So that leads to resources. We're looking for anything from individuals to advocates, businesses, anything that assists boards in diversity, inclusion, equity, decolonization, as well as research websites. We've had some people who've sent us great podcasts, and we really appreciate that because we've gotten great information for the project from there. We're also looking for researchers who are interested in gathering this information and looking into kind of best practices. So my organization is funding this for the first 6 months, and we're doing that because we really want the conversation to drive the direction of the project. We didn't want to get funding that had kind of walls that trapped us in, and if something comes up that we feel we can really address, not have that funding be flexible for that. So for the first 6 months of this year, we're having conversations with as many people as possible. And then mid-year, we're going to take those conversations and find a couple of projects to do from there. And that's when we'll be looking for funding. But in the meantime, if people do know of funding sources, we'd appreciate you letting us know. One of the things we've talked about is having a board diversity database, kind of a LinkedIn for people from underrepresented populations, where boards could go and people could connect with whatever interests them. And if you're interested in possibly having a profile, this is a long-term goal. This is going to take a while, so we're just trying to make people aware of it at this point, but please do consider it. One of the things that has come up is that a mentoring program would be really good. There's a lot of people who have no board experience, and so jumping into a 4-year commitment is quite a bit, especially when they don't feel like they have support. And so we're looking at creating a mentoring program that would make people feel better supported from people who have experience. We have a newsletter that we're going to be launching, we hope, at the end of April. And it's going to have information about where our project is, some of the great resources that we're discovering, what our conversations are about. The current conversations, one of the ones we're having is board governance. For example, Indigenous people, how can we ask them to participate in a system that is set up in the same way that has been oppressing them for decades? And so would we get better board participation from Indigenous people if we changed the way that we run board meetings, if we changed the governance? We're also talking about what is diversity. Diversity is a word that gets thrown around a lot.
You won't find anywhere else. Visit choicesmarkets.com to find your closest location.
I'm not sure what that was, but...
The national team is coming to BC Place for a crucial qualifying match against French Guiana on March 24th. Support Canada's next generation of dynamic young stars, featuring former Whitecaps phenom.
Not on mute, maybe?
Just $20 at Ticketmaster.com.
Great. Can you put yourself on mute?
That's the 2019 CONCACAF World Cup as the road to the 2022 FIFA World Cup continues. Catch Canada's top...
I don't have a mouse right now. Hold on.
March 24th at BC Place.
Bring it on! Hakeem Optical's spring sale is in...
There we go. All right. Well, you know, YouTube videos always have a commercial that pops up in the middle, so that was our version of that. But yeah, some of the conversations we're having are how can we achieve diversity? What does diversity look like? The value of lived experience. Why don't we have diversity on boards? And what do the statistics say? Interestingly, the statistics actually say that the boards are becoming less diverse, not more. So we're going backwards. So again, this is something that we're trying to address is, you know, what is it about the boards that they don't feel they're getting the support to be able to have that diversity? Possible directions with this project is definitely a website with a hub of information. One of the things that we've heard from a lot of people is that it takes quite a few years to build up connections, to know about what's going on, where you live, what workshops there are, what advocates, who to follow. And so that's something that we could have on the Hub of Information. Required diversity training for all board members. We had one organization who came to us who had really good Asian population representation on their board, and they all disappeared at the same time. And they said, we must have done something wrong, but we don't know what. And so they talked about having our organization do the exit interviews. So it's coming from an external source, and people can be more honest because they're not having to present information to the same people that they're going to be seeing within their field. Or we've talked about conferences with panels advising, already using the advocates that are out there and just bringing them together for a full day of information for people who are interested in boards as well as those who are on boards. You can go to our website. It's www.canbc.org. And we've got this information in PDF, large print, PDF, and EPUB formats. And you can contact me at info@canbc.org. And so that's the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. So I have everybody on mute right now, but you can unmute yourselves. And I'm sure Heather would love to hear your sort of feedback or questions, any experiences that you have that you might be able to share with her. So just click on your unmute button if you'd like to say something, because I don't have a mouse right now. So
one of the questions we're looking at is in what ways do organizations make things not accessible or not welcoming to people from populations that aren't often there? So do any of you have an experience that you can share where either, the organization just didn't create a welcoming environment, or a situation in which you were able to talk to an organization about what they could do to improve to have more people with disabilities come?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I guess this is okay. There's a store on Davie Street, and I live in Vancouver, and they have no accessibility. And he first blamed the company, and then he found out. He said, "Well, I don't mandatorily have to have it."
Right.
And this went on for about 6 months with him saying he was going to get it, and then when he found out he didn't mandatory have to have it, so no button to get in, nothing. So is there nothing I can do?
You can talk to the city, but unfortunately, if it's a smaller store, it doesn't have to have an automatic button.
It's Money Mart, which is a chain.
Oh, Money Mart. Yeah. Terry, do you know?
I would, yeah, I don't know who would was thinking about manage. Maybe there's a city block manager. I'm not sure though, but I can see if I can try to find out some information for you.
That would be great, because he, for like 6 months, he blamed the person that owned the property.
Right, and I mean that could be
no. That's not it. And now then he was nice, but then when he found out he didn't have to legally do so, he's totally turned into like the meanest person.
Aww.
Yeah.
What's your first name?
Caroline.
Caroline. Oh, Caroline. Yeah. Okay. I'll send you some. I'll send you some information.
Thank you.
Find something. Yeah. So I have a question, Heather. Do you have, are you like across Canada? Do you work mostly in BC? Like, what is the Board Diversity Project looking at?
Right now we're looking at BC, but we do have interest from people in other provinces, as well as there's someone at the World Health Organization who sees this as a really interesting project and is following us. And so, yeah, we launched it last month, and so right now most of our conversations have been in the Lower Mainland and Fraser Valley, and now we're trying to get further up because that geographical representation is so important for BC. And what we're hoping is that we make a website that is easily duplicatable which other provinces can do as well. So we're looking at this very much like a community project. As much as our organization is going to helm it, we want other people to feel like there's ownership in it and to help grow it from there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I guess maybe my first question is, like, you know, for maybe people who've never been on a board before, but why would you even want to be on a board? Like, what does that mean?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the main reasons people go on boards is because they like an organization and they want to help with that organization. It is important to know exactly what a board does, because there is a lot of paperwork and there's financials and things like that, which, if that's not what you're interested in, can become tedious. However, the board is what sets the direction for the organization. It's the organizing body that hires the executive director, and the executive director is the one who usually comes up with kind of each year's goals. And so the board kind of has that ultimate authority. And that's why diversity is so important, is if you don't have it at the top, then it's very hard to get it to trickle down. And boards will look at the various issues that are happening within the organization. They look at the finances, they make sure that everything is legal, and that everything is happening as it should. One of the things I liked in a board I was on is they approached every decision with this thought in mind: what would it look like if it was on the cover of the Vancouver Sun tomorrow? Mm-hmm. Essentially, you know, if you want your organization to be good, you want a good headline and not a bad one. And hiring is another responsibility of the board. And that's one of the interesting conversations within the changing of the governance, is that boards are not for everybody. But what if we changed boards so that they were more inclusive to people? And one of the things that we've thought of is having various subcommittees that could be training ground for people who are interested in boards. It gives them an experience to try and see if they're interested in working with the board, if they're interested in working at that level, and they can choose a specific thing that they're interested in. So if there's an organization, say, and it has an accessibility branch, and it has a sport branch, and it has, say, playground branch, they can kind of pick which they are interested in. We were talking to the BC SPCA, and they were saying they have a lot of people who are interested in board participation, and it'd be great to have the smaller committees to be able to get more people on board. And another reason that people often join boards is for prestige. They like to have their name attached to organizations and say that they're on that board as well. For boards, they look for people who can help with funding. We have been talking to a variety of nonprofits, and so some of them are very small nonprofits with, say, 3 people on the board, small budget, and then we're talking to boards that have upwards of 40 people and essentially have to go away for 2 weeks a year to do all the business. And there's very different reasons for joining depending on what level you are at.
And are all boards volunteers?
There are some at the higher level that do pay, but that's rare. And the TransLink board, for example, is a board that gets paid. And so there are corporation boards where you can be paid, but the majority of them are volunteer.
Okay. And if you found an organization that you felt passionate about, you wanted to be a part of your board or their board, how do you go about sort of applying for that position or putting your name out there?
That is one of the barriers, is that often it takes a connection within the organization in order to get your name put forward, or them being aware of you. Or some people have, taken a resume in and dropped it off at the desk and said, we want to apply for the board. Often nonprofits will also post whenever their AGM is happening and that there will be board elections, and people can come to the meeting. So if you're a member of an organization and you go to the AGM, you can put yourself forward to go on the board as well.
That's good. So with the board diversity project, Obviously you're finding, or you have found, that there isn't enough diversity in boards. And I agree. I'd sometimes like look at some boards and I just think it's a whole bunch of people that maybe have good connections or good money, but not actually someone from, the population that they're serving. And how can you lead an organization if you don't have at least some representation? Is that accurate? Or
that is accurate. For example, there's a lot of poverty reduction organizations in the downtown east side that are run by middle income people who have no idea what it is like to live in poverty. And so while they may be on our side and be working with us, they just do not know what it is to have that lived experience. And it's vital for the direction of any organization that represents that population to truly understand what it's like to live there. Mm-hmm. There's organizations that what's her name? There's a politician in the U.S. that just put forward a bill that said that all the corporations would have to have at least 2 staff members, say for a car manufacturer plant, then 2 of the people from the floor would have to be on the board so that they had proper representation for the staff.
Hey, Caroline, can you put yourself on mute again? Sorry.
That's okay. So that they can make decisions about bonuses and staff. And this is the problem. Is I talked to a woman who has worked with her corporation for 10 years, and she's finally convinced them that she can work on a diversity project. But the diversity that they're looking for is white women. They haven't even gotten to racialized, indigenous, queer. They're strictly still looking for women to be on the board. And this is the thing, is that some boards are just so used to their composition looking a certain way that they do not see anything wrong with it. And lived experience, unfortunately, is often undervalued. Mm-hmm. I think we really need to reframe it as a specialty. A board will often have an accountant and they only know the math, and a lawyer who only knows the law. And so why can't we have somebody who has that lived experience, and it's a specialty? It's, something that they've had to go through a lot in order to achieve. And they may not have come out with a degree, but they've definitely come out with some hard-won knowledge. And that's what we're trying to get them to see. We also really want to address meaningful participation. So for myself, I was on a board. I was in a power wheelchair. And when I started walking, sometimes they did not want me on the board anymore because I didn't have a visible disability. And it wasn't so much that they wanted me on their board. It was that they wanted someone with a visible disability on their board so that they could say that they had diversity. And it's those kind of experiences that we want to avoid. We want to make sure that it's meaningful participation, not tokenism. That they're not just saying, oh, look, we have a Black person or a racialized person or a queer person, and so we're diverse. We want them to actually have a board that is composed of many intersecting identities as well.
So how do you avoid tokenism?
Diversity training is huge. I think understanding the systems by which we live without really realizing we live under them, and that's kind of decolonization and patriarchy, and making sure that people understand that we have the minority is now the majority in Vancouver, for example. We found some stats that were really good for the Metro Vancouver area, and it's 52% of the population is a minority. And on boards and nonprofits, 13% are of a minority group. And it's that we really need to address. And first of all, it's an awareness that there is an issue, because there are boards that just genuinely are moving forward and not looking around the room and thinking, oh, are we missing anybody? There's a lot of people who walk into a room and never have to question their place in that room. And these are the same people who don't think to look around a room and say, hey, is there diversity here? So awareness is the first step. And then getting some training for them to understand how to be more inclusive. There's a lot of boards we've talked to who are really interested in diversifying their boards, but they're scared to offend someone. And so in order to not offend someone, they just don't participate. They just don't put themselves out there or try to have someone who is diverse. And so we have to address that as well. We have to recognize that there is a discomfort from people on the boards not wanting to do the wrong thing, and how to support them. So I think that support is key. Education is key. Another thing we've heard is that they don't know which group to start with. So if they start to educate themselves about Indigenous people or people with disabilities or trans folks, going to be upset that they didn't start with them. And so because they don't want to insult one group, they then just kind of don't do anything. And so also kind of letting them know what are ways that they can reach out to different communities for help, so it's not fully on them. And also talking about intersectionality, because we have people who are in multiple groups. And that's one of the things that we have to address as well. Also, visibility is another thing. We want people to think less about diversity based on what they can see and how people identify as themselves. There's a lot of disabilities that are invisible, and so someone may not look like they have a disability, but they may actually have a disability, and you may have somebody on your board who could be offering valuable information, but you're not creating that environment in which they feel comfortable sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I'm on a board myself right now. And what I, see of the board, I was asked to be on the board, or invited to be on the board, but it's definitely, so it's a sport organization, and it's definitely, I'm one of two people that have a disability, three people that have a disability on the board. But everyone's involved in sport and wheelchair sport in some way, right? So my understanding was that, they were choosing people, number one, based on sort of location, because it's a provincial organization. They wanted to have people from different regions represented, as well as certain roles that on the board they would fill, right? Yeah. So yes, you do need someone who's good at finance, right? You do need, maybe a communication, like whatever, every board is different, but maybe it's like those roles. So I guess I wouldn't know how to look for that, or even know what role I could fill. Like, I feel like I'm a kind of an idea person, and am the person with lived experience, but I don't think we, even with people as disabilities, appreciate how much we do have to offer, especially boards that are involved in, disabled organizations. I think it's really, really important. And I go to many conferences, and the majority of the people there are people that are not, with a disability. So. Yeah.
I mean, I've spoken at 2 different conferences this year where I said to them, is the room set up in a way that's accessible for people with mobility aids? And they said, oh no, we've got a special table that you can sit at. And I said, no, for other participants. And they honestly, that had never gone into their mind that there'd be a participant with a disability. And so, yeah, it's trying to address that it is partly because people don't know they have a place in that room, and it's partly because that room has never been set up in a way that accepts them. And I must admit, I'll go into a meeting, and if there's absolutely no space for someone in a wheelchair, I roll my eyes and go, okay, this isn't going to go well. And, that's the thing, is that there's different ways that boards, right from the moment somebody walks into a room, are already showing that they're not welcoming. And so it's addressing that. it's also empowering people to see what they have to offer, as you mentioned. We've been talking with Mosaic, which represents immigrants and refugees, and they were saying that oftentimes their schooling will be devalued because they can't transfer it over to Canada. And so they then expect that none of their experience, work or otherwise, is going to be valued in any capacity here. And so they just don't think to volunteer for boards. And I think that happens with people with disabilities as well. Oftentimes we're not paid for our expertise. We're expected to volunteer. And so that sometimes makes people feel like there's less value in what they have to offer. And so trying to get people to understand what they have to offer. I talked to a fellow who he helped with board selections, and he said that 90% of the time he'd send a person's resume back and say, these are some things that you can do to improve how you're selling yourself. And that's something that we've looked at too, is within the conference that I had mentioned that might be a possibility, is talking to people about how to sell themselves. And so that's one of the big things is do you know how to sell yourself? Do you know how to make a resume that's specific to board experience? Do you know how to sell your lived experience? And how to kind of help people with that. An organization that I like is Kickstart, which is Disability Arts. And they have a mandate that half of their board has to have a disability. And I believe they're at 65%. So it's also policy changes that organizations can make if they're really committed to diversity. They can put in a number and say, hey, this is what we want to achieve. And so, yeah, it's educating both sides, and it's making sure that people are comfortable with what they have to offer. And that's why we're trying to talk to people across the province too, because I've talked to some people up north who are like, well, these Vancouver organizations don't want to hear from us. And so it's also trying to bridge those communication gaps of, say, a Vancouverite who has no idea what it's like to live in Terrace, or what life with a disability is like up there versus down here. Or, for people who don't understand what it's like to have come from a refugee camp and come to Canada, and how some people may need a little help with their English or may need different formats for the information that they share. And so that's one of the things that we were looking at, that maybe our organization helps support that. So we're going to work with Mosaic on trying to figure out how to help immigrants and refugees, and we're looking to do the same with other populations. We're also working with Community, which is down here, which is for queer folk. I actually run a group in Vancouver on the second Wednesday of every month, and it's called Chronically Queer, and it's for queer folk that have chronic health conditions. And Community is very supportive of this project as well, because there is a lot of populations that aren't represented on boards. The trans community is one. There's organizations that represent people who are trans who have nobody who is trans on the board. And this is kind of the tomorrow that we would like to get to, where there is no such thing as a board that does not have someone from the group they're representing there. Mm-hmm. Or another experience that I had that was great was I was talking to a woman who had depression, and she applied for a board, and they asked her if there was anything that would keep her from participating on the board. And she said, well, I have depression, so I occasionally have a depressive episode where I can't get out of bed for several days. And they were like, well, yeah, that's a part of depression, understandably, but is there anything that precludes your participation? And that's the kind of story that I want to hear more of, where a board is understanding. They know that, sometimes people have things in their lives that they can't control, but that they're willing to participate when they can. And that we can all work around some of these things. It's the same with people who may not be in Vancouver. These days, a board can easily change their bylaws and have meeting participation via video conference like we're doing now. And so it's making sure that boards also know about these opportunities, as well as to have people who may be interested in a board but think, I could never get down to Vancouver, or I couldn't get in the winter, I couldn't get out to, wherever they have to go. to push that organization to have their participation via video conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important to you. Even some organizations I'm affiliated with still, we just use the phone, which is fine, but it doesn't have the same sort of experience. And I'm not sure why people are so reticent. Maybe they're worried about confidentiality. That could be a big thing in boards if they're worried about, names, or, how do you address those sorts of things with boards?
Yeah, recording is one of the things. Like, would they know if somebody was recording the meeting without, and so privacy is one of the concerns, but there are ways around that, and so trying to address that as well, because that's another thing that we hear a lot of from. We have done projects throughout the province, and when we go further north, we often hear from people that kind of who is representing them doesn't know what it actually is like to live in these areas. Mm-hmm. And so it really affects how they're able to provide the services that they need. And so I think we're going to challenge organizations to really question what is their priority. And if their priority is to truly represent people from across the province, then they would have to have people from across the province on their board. And I had a friend joke that I was essentially working to build a Better Business Bureau website for boards, where eventually what we might have is a spotlight on the boards who are working towards diversity, who are doing the work, who are looking for ways to have a more inclusive environment. And that way we're not shaming anyone. If an organization is not named within that list, then that's, on them, and we're not specifically pointing them out, but we are pointing out who is doing the work. And one of the things that has come up a lot is decolonization. It was interesting because when I had to make up the 2-page description for the project to put on our website, and to those who are looking to join boards, I was kind of selling it in one way, in that we're trying to shift power and get better representation on boards. But to boards, I was talking about how the members are really wanting more diversity and better representation, and statistics show that the more diverse the board, the better the organizations actually do. But decolonization is one of those words that if I had started off with saying, in order to achieve diversity, we need to talk about decolonization, I would have lost like half of the boards right away. So it's also getting boards familiar with some of these phrases, making them a little less scary, giving them practical steps that they can do to kind of go from such a huge idea to small steps that they can do to really make sure that they're not just checking a box. I think land acknowledgements are a perfect example. I've been in boards where they do it so respectfully, and it obviously comes from the heart, and they've worked to do a really nice land acknowledgement and say what it means to that organization. And then I've seen people who just very quickly, say the 4-line land acknowledgement and don't get Tsleil-Waututh even nearly right, and just speed through it because it's another check on the box. And we want to make sure that people aren't doing that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I want to open it up. I think there's someone on the phone. Do you have any questions on the phone? Oh, can't hear you if you do. George, any questions for you? You can unmute yourself if you do. Can't see him. So, Jeff, what about you?
I'm all good, thanks.
Okay, sounds good. What about Lorraine? Nothing? Marnie? Nope, good. Maureen?
All's good.
All good.
I can tell you a couple of the things that we've learned is, for example, in the States, orchestras realized that they were very white and they asked, how do we address this? And so what they started doing is they did auditions where the people would take their shoes off behind the stage, and then one by one they'd come and audition in front of a screen. And all of a sudden their orchestras were more diverse. And I think that's a good example of people not realizing that we have unconscious bias, that sometimes the way a person looks changes how we hear what they sound like. The idea of taking their shoes off behind this stage was to make sure that you don't hear cowboy boots or high heels or sneakers and, you know, begin to make those judgments about people. And it's very natural to make judgments about people. That's kind of how we survive. But it's how to come up with tools and ways to make sure that boards are really looking at how they look at people and what is the process. There's a lot of corporations that now take all names off resumes because names can indicate nationality. And unfortunately, that sometimes lowers the chances of those people getting hired. And so they just completely eliminate that and only show the skills section to the people who are trying to figure out who to hire. And so it's looking at solutions like that for the boards as well, ways to help themselves essentially. And, you know, here in Vancouver and throughout the province, we have so many great advocates who work on these issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially from a social justice lens. And one of the things is we don't even know who each other is. So then it's hard for us to suggest to boards who they should talk to. And that's something that we hope the website does as well, is kind of list who are the advocates and who can people go to find information, and you know, do these people have workshops that are happening that they can get involved with. We also really want to address finances, because there are a lot of workshops and conferences for board participation, but they are not affordable. And for people who live in poverty, for people with disabilities, for people who are underemployed, or just dealing with the expenses of life, it is really hard to even begin to learn about boards when you have to question whether that money can be used elsewhere. And so that's something that we're looking at too, is maybe we need to work with neighborhood houses and have free sessions and train people. And what would that look like?
Carolyn, do you have anything you'd like to ask or say? No? And Teresa, you're on my list too.
Yeah, I sort of was late in joining, so I missed quite a bit.
That's all right. Do you have any questions?
We had a loose swan in the yard with a broken wing.
Aww. That's cool.
No, I don't have any questions right now. Thanks.
All right, cool. So Heather, what do you need from us? Like, I saw you want to ask certain questions, get feedback, you know, find out what people want, what they're looking for, but how do we, like, are you going to be doing a survey? What's the process of that?
Right now we're having conversations, so either by phone, email, or in person. And they're general. We have not set questions because we believed that if we decide the questions, not only does that kind of direct the direction we're going, but it may show some of our own unconscious bias. So we're trying to start this project with a beginner's mind. I think there's a Buddhist parable that says to think of your mind like a cup of tea. And if your cup of tea already has tea all the way to the top, you know, you have a full mind and you think you know how everything works, then any tea that you pour into that afterwards, any new ideas, is just going to overflow. And so we're very much trying to start this with a beginner's mind, an empty mind, and not think about our experiences or where we're coming from, but really let the conversations flow where they will, and then have the direction come from that. And so that's where, we really are talking to absolutely anyone, whether you have no board experience, whether you've thought of boards a couple of times, but just don't, there's something stopping you from making that step, or whether you've been on boards for 30 years. And we just want to hear about people's experiences. Even if you haven't been on boards and are not interested, what are your experiences with diversity and inclusion? And, how do organizations show and prove to you that they really want your participation, that they value your membership, that they want to properly address the issues that you want them to address?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's such a huge question, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know if any organization can say they're doing everything for everybody. So there's always going to be a fault, a hole somewhere.
But it's interesting because there's, there's a little organization, and much like somebody earlier mentioned, the store owner who won't put in the automatic button. This organization, they did not have the funding for an automatic button, but they put a doorbell in. And then they always had staff that was nearby who could run and open the door for anybody who needed it. And, it's not the most ideal solution, but it really showed that they were willing to think about an alternative and do something that would show that they want that person to come to their organization, that they want to do what they can. There's another organization downtown that it has showers and kind of a rest area for people who are homeless. And they held these seminars on the second floor, and they do not have funding for an elevator. And so what they did is they rigged up an audio video feed from upstairs to a downstairs room, and they got some really nice comfortable couches, and they got a big TV. And eventually it was almost that everybody wanted to stay downstairs and watch from the TV and not go up where it was live. But it really showed that they wanted people to be there who couldn't do stairs, who can, and it's kind of talking to organizations about that. Often organizations think that we're going to expect them to rip out their entire office and rebuild it for wheelchairs, and it's going to be a huge cost. But oftentimes there's so many things that organizations can do just on a attitudinal accessibility level to show that they want that inclusion, that they want that person to be part of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know my first board experience, and I think this is a really good way to get involved, was actually when I lived in a co-op, and I was a board, I was the president of our co-op. But what was interesting is our membership in itself, I was in business for years before that, so I had knowledge of how a board ran, but no one else did.
Right.
So it was me trying to teach people, educate people how, a meeting was run, and, we have an agenda and you work through the agenda. And so it was kind of time consuming, and some people don't care, right? And they just say whatever they want, but, making sure that everybody still feels like they got heard, but having to, not having your meetings be 5 hours long and just 2 hours long is the most important thing. Okay, how about we discuss this and put it on the agenda for next week or whatever. Yeah. So that was a really good, I think, start for me, and showed me, my skills. Right. So, and I know many of us, probably are in co-ops and live in co-ops, and it's a kind of a good opportunity, I think, anyways, for a good place to start if you don't know where else to go, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a little more of a relaxed environment. And that's where, I think we do need some organizations to think about setting up committees that are, a pipeline to board participation, so that you don't expect people to start at the board, but you have other committees that they can work. Say they have committees where one person from the board is assigned to each committee, and that person kind of keeps an eye on those who are in that group and see if there's anybody who would be good for board participation. They can see how you are. You can see if the organization is a good fit for you before you commit to a 3 or 4 year term. And look for things like that in a more relaxed way, like co-op boards.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from the peanut gallery? Does anyone have board experience already? And yeah, Jeff, go. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Hold on, maybe I have to unmute you. Okay, go.
I got asked to be on a board for blind people.
Okay.
And I've been on that board for, 5 years.
Yeah.
And then I decided that where I lived in a neighborhood, we needed universal access in getting onto a city bus.
Right.
So I lobbied to have a wider stop platform put in, and we just got them installed last week.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's great.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example of the positive change that we can make when you've got somebody who knows, what is actually needed.
It seems like there's always a process.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's well, and to be honest, that's partly why I started my organization. Was I was on a municipal advisory committee, and they took an entire year to send, not write because the letter was written, but send a letter to the Ministry of Transportation about an inaccessible street light button. And I just thought, I don't have the patience for this. I need to be able to send that letter myself directly to the people, and started my organization because of it. Because sometimes it is so slow to get that moving. And often it's because, again, they don't have lived experience. They don't understand the urgency of accessibility and how if you need accessibility, you need it now. You don't need it in 5 or 10 years, and you don't need it in bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and Jeff, that's also a great example, and kind of what Heather's saying there as well is how, how we do need people like us involved, right? Otherwise, it's about educating, because most of the public, I mean, to be honest with you, before I was in a chair, I didn't know anything about disability. Like, I had no idea. And I just assume most everybody was like me, right? Probably have no idea also, unless you have some kind of, someone, or maybe you're in the healthcare system or whatever. But if you don't, then you really don't know. So we have to be the teachers and educators, and, maybe that's educating ourselves a little bit more about what's out there as well. And that's okay. But, to be able to get to those people, to be able to make those changes, and have that support.
Yeah, and while we're starting it with boards, we really see this as a project that can be transferred to committee work and various other groups and applications. And one of them is more hospitals are having these patient advisory networks or committees. And so how do we help them make sure that they've got patients on that committee that aren't just duplicating the exact same experience, but are coming from, like, what is it like to access the healthcare system if you're Indigenous, or if you have a disability, or if you're nonverbal, or, any of these things. And so, we're hoping that this can be duplicated in other areas as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Does anybody else want to share their board experience or any interest of being on a board?
And even if you just want to let us know why board participation is not of interest to you, that's something that's good to know. And is there anything that could be changed within kind of a board that would make you more interested? Maybe you've been on a board and didn't have a good experience, and if you have anything to offer there, or, if you just know of anybody else that's interested, please do share the information. As I say, it's on our website, and I'd really appreciate it. Because yeah, we're already having some pretty exciting conversations. I think the time is ripe right now for these conversations. I think there is more talk about diversity, and now it's time to like dig in deep and make sure people aren't just kind of like throwing that word around, but that they actually know what it means and how important it is.
Mm-hmm. Heather, in the chat box there, do you want to type your website, and do you want people to contact you directly, go through the website? How do you want to?
Yeah, you can contact me directly. I'm the project lead, so then I'll include my email address. It's the same as the website. It's just got info instead of www. So
perfect. Great. And then if anyone wants to sort of share, I know it's kind of a lot because they're just getting started. So it's like, how can I help this project? Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, it's just basically about sharing sort of what you already know or what you don't know or what you would like to know, right? So Jeff, like your story of being on a board, like why did you join that board? Like, why was that important to you? Because that could really help someone else who maybe doesn't know how to get involved, right? So, and they chose you, but why do you think they chose you? Those kinds of questions I think are good to get people started, right? And help the conversation with boards within themselves.
Exactly. And, nothing may come to mind right now, but this is an ongoing project. So please do, sometimes something percolates in the back of your mind for a while, and then all of a sudden one day you're like, aha. So if you have that moment, please do contact me.
Awesome.
Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. If anyone has any final words, please just unmute yourself or whatever. But otherwise, we'll let you go early.
I would like to say thank you, Heather. I found this interesting and informative. I really enjoyed this short amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, have a great night, everybody. And we will see you at the next one.
One quick question.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Maybe technical. When you added your information here, although because I do want to look at your website because I missed so much of it and I regret that. I see it here and there's a chat thing. How do I save it?
Oh, I would, if you can, copy and paste it. That's what I would do. I can also, I'll send it out to everybody as well. And Heather, do you want to maybe pop your slides over to me and then I can send them out to these guys as well so they can have a look? Yeah. And I'll send out that information to everybody who's attending today.
All right, great.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, there's one last thing, and do share it with anybody, the slides or the 2-pager about it. Please do feel free to share with anybody.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.